The following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
Merryl Tisch is an extraordinary woman of great accomplishment. Are you leaving, Merryl? No. Oh, okay.
I was going to preempt your introduction.
No, you're not.
Yes,
Let me tell people about you. You're a good person.
I am.
All right. Of course, she serves as Chancellor of the New York State Board of Regents, the body charged with almost everything. You can't be a barber without getting the regents to approve it. And that makes Dr. Merryl Tisch the most important educational official in the state of New York. She is. That's you, Merryl. As Chancellor, Dr. Tisch led the board in the development of a tremendous reform system, winning $696 million for the state. That looks like six.
I know, but it was 9.
Who sent me this? $699 million.
And I'm not that rich that $3 million doesn't count.
Okay. And that was not easy, because the federal government was not going to, they had many things you had to do that weren't easy to get done, and Merryl got it done. So I thank you for that, Merryl. That $699.5 million is impressive. Most important to me, and I'm going to skip this, from 1977 to 1984, Merryl Tisch taught first graders in New York City schools. That's 7 years as a teacher. That is impressive to me. So, of course, she has a doctorate, and she's shy. And she seldom really says what she's feeling. Hardly ever. But that's what we need in top officials. The ability to say, something isn't exactly the way it appears to be. And I thank Merryl for that. And I thank you for being here. You're a dear woman.
Thank you very much. I think over the years that I've served in different capacities around the city, I've had the privilege of working with quite a few of you. So being here today is really like being among a group of colleagues and friends and coming to have a chat. Cy alluded to the role of the Board of Regents, but I'm going to take a minute and walk you through it. There are 17 members of the Board of Regents. I believe 13 of them represent judicial districts. 4 of them are at-large members, which means they represent the state as a totality. I'm one of the at-large members. And the authority of the board is quite unique. We charter all colleges, universities, public and private, museums, libraries, archives. We license 48 professions. And we are in charge of K-12 policy decisions as they impact education throughout this state. I want to just start by telling all of you that we all know we are in a different reality than perhaps we found ourselves in 5 years ago and 6 years ago. The fiscal realities of a state that has come across hard times is very real in the world of education. New York State spends $55 billion a year on K-12 education. There are 3.2 million school children in the system in 700 school districts. It is a vast array of differences. And the governor is right to ask, what is it that we are buying for $55 billion? Certainly, if you read the newspapers, you will see that our NAEP scores Those are the national assessments. They are the gold mark of teaching and learning by which it's judged. Our NAEP scores in New York State went down. 2 years ago, I think you will all remember, that Commissioner Steiner and I took a very aggressive step when we said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to unpack the fact that New York State's NAEP scores are not great, even though their state test scores are great, and we're going to tell the truth. We are going to tell parents across this state that when your kids are graduating from high schools in New York State, they are neither prepared for a career nor for college entrance. In New York City, where we have, I think, the greatest shot at reforming a large urban public system due to remarkable leadership, both from the mayor and his school chancellors, 75% of our youngsters in New York City who graduate from our high schools and go on to 2-year college programs require remedial work. That is an unbelievable number. And the mayor once said to me, Merrill, I promised New York I was going to end social promotion. But here I am with 75% of the kids coming out of my high schools not able to go on to a 2-year program. What happens in these 2-year programs is that these youngsters use all of their tuition assistance. So by the time they are ready to matriculate into their regular courses, they need to take out loans. As a result, in our 2-year city university programs, after 5 and sometimes 6 years, less than 25% of the entering youngsters actually complete their 2-year programs. So we have a crisis, and it's a crisis for our future. And I would like to say how it is we feel we can address this crisis. Race to the Top, as Cy alluded to, it was a challenge grant that was put together by the federal government, and it required several assurances from states who competed. Number one, it said, you will make decisions for education based on a statewide data system. That was part of our application. The state will have an accountability and assessment system that passes the smell test. We've been trying to do that by recalibrating our state tests. You must adopt the Common Core in English language arts and math to acknowledge that families in this country are mobile. Children who move from Colorado to Utah to New Jersey because their families are following job opportunities need to be assured that wherever they are in the school year, they will be getting either a 3rd grade education or a 4th grade education. We adopted the Common Core. And finally, it said to us, you've got to invest a lot of your resources in rebuilding failing schools. You've got to create more charter opportunities, more choice opportunities, and you've got to invest in schools that are just not making the bar, but with some help could actually be retooled. So I feel at this juncture, a year into the race to the top, it's really important to give you, the taxpayers of New York, a report card of where we are. I'll start with the data system. We put together an application to build a statewide data system, and we tried to use a vendor called Wireless Generation, which had built the data system in New York City. That would have been a $70 million savings to the state of New York. Politics intervened, and we lost the ability to do a no-bid contract because people were picking a fight with Rupert Murdoch. The unions didn't like his position on this, that, or the other thing. And in the interim between when we put together this data system application and the granting of the award, Rupert Murdoch's company had bought Wireless Generation. So we do not yet have a data system. I think that is a real tragedy. We are going to reapply through the regular methods, but make no mistake, it will be a more expensive, less efficient, and less sophisticated data system that New York State is going to have as a result of this. That's just the truth, the unvarnished truth. I'd like to tell you a little bit about where we are on retooling our assessments. There, I think the picture is far rosier. As I said to you briefly before, we recalibrated the state tests so that the difference between how our students are performing on the NAEP exams and how they're performing on state exams are much more closely aligned. I mean, it did not pass the smell test that 98% of our youngsters in 3rd grade were proficient in math. Anyone looking at that, even if they were not in education, would know that statistically there was something wrong. We've addressed that. Additionally, I think it is important for all of you to know that New York State is a lead state in the PARC Consortium. That is a consortium of states funded by the federal government to produce a set of exams to align with the Common Core standards. So every youngster in this country will ultimately get the same test, and states will not be able to play games around the efficiency and the efficacy of the educational opportunities that they are giving their youngsters in classrooms across this country every single day. I want to talk a little bit about the rebuilding of our failing schools, and I think I'm going to be stepping on some toes here, so I apologize in advance. I know that your organization has long been involved in the charter school movement. I personally myself have invested a lot of personal resources in helping charter schools. I've used my authority as a member of the board to allow every charter school to grow and flourish. I fought really hard when people told me that in order to compete for Race to the Top, the state would have to raise their cap on the number of charter schools. I said to the then sitting governor, Governor, if you do not raise the cap, I will not be putting my signature on that application for Race to the Top, simply because that is the authority that I have as Chancellor, and I will not be squandering my good name for a losing cause. They raised the cap. They raised it substantially. They added, I think, 240 more charter schools across the state over the next 5 years. But the challenges for charter schools are real, and I think those of you involved in starting them and funding them need to know what the reality is. The reality is that charter schools, while granting youngsters opportunity and giving them a choice and giving their families a choice, they are a great, great entity and engine and tool for reform. That being said, charter schools need to be very aware of the pitfalls as they come in to their adolescence. Number one, I think, and James will bear this out, we have had a long history where charter schools did not take some of our English language learners and special needs students as they were getting off the ground. Charter schools are working aggressively and eagerly to correct that. Charter schools are showing some very varied results. A third of them are outstanding, a third of them are fine, and a third of them are not so fine. We need, James and I and CEI, we need to speak up that charter schools need to represent quality options. We should not open charter schools just for the sake of opening a charter school. They should be financed, they should have an articulation of an instructional vision, and they should be engines of change. Additionally, charter schools should be a community resource, and by that I mean you cannot sit alone in an isolated environment and not share your practice and your fortune with those schools in your surrounding neighborhood. You cannot be enemies in your community. You need to serve communities and build those capacities. I believe this with all my heart, and I believe to the extent that charter schools choose the good fight, they will continue to grow and prosper in New York State, because we have created a charter-friendly environment. If charter schools pick the wrong fights, if they go into communities that do not want them or that do not need them, if they take on the fights for a middle-class population while youngsters are in need in the highest need school districts in our city, I happen to think that is a wrong fight. And we will be judged by the fights that we choose, and we will share these burdens across the charter school movement. So I urge you to urge your charter schools to stand with me to pick the right fights. We went into the charter school movement to create opportunities where none existed. And I will not allow us to squander that opportunity, because it would be an enormous tragedy. I want to shift a little bit to the capacity of the State Education Department. Over the last 5 years, the State Education Department has lost 42% of its funding. We have lost 500 employees. During the time that we took on the work of Race to the Top, we had one person working in the State Education Department in curriculum and instruction. That was it, one person. We had a half a person working in the math and science area. But we knew we had taken on this obligation, and we knew no more money would be forthcoming from a state that was looking at an enormous budget gap. So I, together with the board, we decided to create a fellowship program. And in that fellowship program, we have been able to attract 12 people to work as Regents Fellows. And I would like to tell you that the assault on these fellows has been dramatic. Our friends in the union have opposed them. Our friends across the state, school boards, school associations have opposed them. I would just say to you that it is important for you to understand the quality of the people. We were able to attract the person from the College Board who was in charge of the AP system. That is the young woman who is in charge of reinventing New York State's assessments. Let me further go on to tell you that this young woman sits at the Federal State Education Department as their greatest resource in the development of the Common Core assessments. So in this fellowship, we have bought for New York State a front row seat in the federal government's redesign of urban education. And for those of you who oppose this fellowship, I would say to you, we would welcome you to come and understand the quality of the people that we have attracted, the work that they're doing, the national recognition they are getting for the work that they are doing, and I would urge you to embrace them. I would urge CEI to invite them to a symposium, hear about the thinking that is going on, led by New York State, on behalf of the state and the rest of the country. I think I cannot end my remarks without addressing our relationship with the teachers union. As you know, part of the Race to the Top application was our guarantee that we were going to put in place a teacher evaluation system. Negotiating with the teachers union, we developed a system of 100 points. 20 points on state testing, 20 points towards a teacher evaluation would be some assessment that every district chose for themselves. 60 points would be based on principal observation, peer observations, and all of those other things that go into good teaching. I will tell you that the union sued us in court. They won the suit. As a result of that winning of the suit, if we do not appeal that decision by a single judge, New York State will have a teacher evaluation system where 0 points out of 100 will be based on student performance. I find that unconscionable, and I believe that this is a decision given by this judge that has the word appeal written all over it. We will appeal this decision on behalf of the citizens of New York State, and I will fight in every court where we are permitted to make sure that the evaluation system that we put in place has integrity, both for the teachers and for the students, but most of all, for a system of education that has been crying out for an objective way by which to judge its teaching force for decades. I want to end, if these were not enough fights, I want to end by sharing with you something that I think is going to be very controversial, but that I think the board and I and the commissioner are deeply committed to. I come from a family of immigrants. To this day, my mother, when she speaks English, and she speaks perfect English, tells me that she is often hindered in public by having to translate everything in her head from German and Yiddish into English. I understand immigration. I am the product of the kindnesses of strangers. Growing up in projects, I knew firsthand what it was for this country, this great country, to open its doors of opportunity to us. In New York State, we have a real problem. So many of our immigrant youngsters finish our high schools, and they would love to go on to higher education. Yet, by virtue of the status of their parents' birth, they are not granted tuition assistance to any of our state and city universities. The Board of Regents is going to call on the state legislature to open up those spigots so that youngsters who complete our high schools and want to go on to be educated and become productive citizens are given a free shot at what it is to be an American in the 21st century. I don't think this is anything we can back away from. It is a question of conscience. It is a question of morality in my mind, and I am really proud to be part of that debate. So I think I've gone on too long, and I really want to end by saying one thing. Why first grade? I always thought that when you do something, you should be remembered for it, right? Sorry? Everyone remembers their first grade teacher. Therefore, in a group where I come today to address the quality of the work that you have done here in this institution, CEI, is a lasting memory of achievement. And the way people remember their first grade teachers, they will remember those people who pioneered a reform effort in a really tough town. I congratulate all of you, and I thank you so much for inviting me.
I didn't want to mention it. Merrill was my first grade teacher. Now we'd like to take some questions. Just raise your hand.
So for 12 years being involved with charters, all I've learned is implementation is everything, structure, not so much. A mandate from the state to do teacher eval, as much as I support it, I just worry, how can you really mandate something that is all about implementation at the principal to teacher level? And do you worry that all of this effort to get the teacher eval system becomes in the hands of people who don't care about it, a box checking exercise that ultimately means that we don't take this seriously?
I think it's a fight that, first of all, we can't shy away from. People focus on the issue of tenure. Why do they focus on the issue of tenure? Because tenure is an arbitrary granting of permanent status to a youngster in their third or fourth year of their career that says you are a lifelong member of what I consider to be a really distinguished club. So I think if you change the debate, and I don't think we're ever going to win the fight over tenure, quite frankly. So if you change the fight to create an arbitrary system by which every teacher in charter, publics, or charters are public schools, in which charter schools or regular are evaluated, then you have an arbitrary tool by which to engage in a conversation. Are you suited to be a lifelong teacher, or perhaps you should be doing something else?
Has the Regents made any decisions with regard to waivers, and which ones you may be interested in presenting? Thanks.
So right now, if we continue down the path of No Child Left Behind, I mean, Charlotte could tell you this better than anyone, just about every school in the state will be designated as not making annual progress. The prescriptions of No Child Left Behind were not nuanced enough to be able to ascertain that a teacher taking a youngster from level 1 to level 2 is actually doing brilliant work. So even if you take a kid from level 1 to level 2, the truth is you're still at level 2 and your school is a failure under No Child Left Behind. So yes, I think the board, Harry, I think we voted to agree to apply for a waiver. We're not going to be applying in the first round because we are out in the field talking to a myriad of constituent groups about what they really need from the waiver. But one thing I can assure you is we will not be backing down from rigor. We will use this as a tool by which to recreate an accountability system that is nuanced, that doesn't make us spend scarce resources on schools that really don't need improvement money, right? But allows us to just target money to places where there's real need.
Well, I'd like to thank Merrill Tisch for an outstanding, honest, really wonderful discussion. And I'd like to thank you all for coming.